15th of September, 1916 is perhaps the most iconic date in the history of armored warfare, as it marked the first time tanks were used in combat. During the Battle of Flers-Courcelette, 49 British Mark I tanks laboriously chugged their way across no man's land, striking terror into the hearts of the German soldiers unfortunate enough to stand in their path. But for all their thunder and fury, the Mark I's were plagued with issues, and in less than 24 hours, only 3 were left operational. The vast majority had not even been taken out by enemy fire, but had either bogged down in the muddy quagmire of the Somme or suffered mechanical failure, some before even reaching British lines. A close observer of this first and somewhat underwhelming deployment of tanks on the battlefield was William Ashbee Tritton, managing director of William Foster and Company. Though it had started out as an agricultural company, the expertise of Foster & Co. had quickly been commandeered for the British war effort. After demonstrating commendable skill at producing the heavy-duty military tractors needed to pull large artillery pieces, Tritton's firm had received the special honor of building the first British tanks to see action during the Great War. But unlike the average military contractor, William Tritton had no interest in laying back and passively reaping the benefits of unlimited government funding for his workshop. As an accomplished engineer and patriot, Tritton was determined to improve upon the lumbering Mark I, both for the sake of his reputation and the lives of the men fighting at the front. Having observed the Mark I in action personally and recorded the situation in France, Tritton rushed back to England and threw himself into working on a new tank design that would complement his initial creation. In addition to his own skills, Tritton benefited from the aid of another engineering talent by the name of William Rigsby. Working side by side through many sleepless nights, the two were able to go from technical drawings to an initial prototype within 2 months. This required drawing heavy inspiration from existing designs, most notably the Austin armored car that had been heavily exported to the Russian Empire. Much like an armored car, Triton intended his new design to be used as a fast but well-armored support vehicle that could be used to help screen the larger Mark I tank, or charge forward and exploit weaknesses in an enemy line, just as a horse cavalry had done in previous wars. In essence, Triton was designing a cruiser tank to complement the infantry tank that was the Mark I, though it's important to note these distinctions were not made official until after the Great War. By February 1917, Triton's prototype was nearly complete, but not without significant compromises to his original vision. One of Triton's biggest gripes was with the engines. In his initial documentation, the ambitious engineer had pegged the top speed of his new vehicle at around 10 miles or 19 kilometers per hour, and had struggled with the War Office to secure a power plant capable of meeting these demands. After much bureaucratic wrangling, Triton was eventually forced to settle on using 2 45-horsepower Tyler JB4 petrol engines for his prototype, later remarking bitterly that the choice of the 45-horsepower engines had spoiled an otherwise useful machine. In spite of this compromise to his vision, Triton's prototype proved itself to be a remarkably nimble little beast, reaching 8 miles or 12 kilometers an hour at running trials conducted on the 11th. This earned it the nickname Triton's Chaser, or simply the Whippet. This latter name would later be used for the entire series of production vehicles, having initially been printed on the front of the prototype, between the turret and the starting crank. Physically, Triton's Chaser was about as different from the Mark I as it was possible to get. With a crew of only 2 men, the vehicle was little more than a rectangle with a single circular turret and driver's compartment in the middle, placed side by side. The 2 engines were front-mounted, with their housing compartment protected at the front by a single flat armor plate. The vehicle was 20 feet or 6.1 meters long and about 9 feet or 2.7 meters tall and wide, being much smaller than the Mark I in all dimensions. One of the most distinctive aspects of Triton's prototype were the 16 sets of Skefco roller bearings that made up the suspension. These heavy-duty bearings were thick and solid enough to count as additional armor, and allowed the design to save on weight by cutting holes in the track housing without severely compromising crew protection. The holes were also part of Tritton's solution to the nightmarish mud of the Somme, which was at least as dangerous a foe as German artillery batteries. While in motion, the chaser's road wheels would push accumulated mud out through these apertures, reducing the risk of track fouling in bad terrain. The offensive capability of the chaser was substantially less than that of the Mark I, consisting initially of a single turret-mounted .303 caliber Lewis machine gun. On the plus side, the turret was capable of 360-degree rotation, allowing it to cover the vehicle from every angle. The vehicle was only lightly armored, having at most between 8 to 14 mm or 0.3 to 0.55 inches of mild steel plating protecting its internals from enemy fire. Sources do not readily specify the weight of the prototype, but it can be assumed it was between 12 to 14 tons, similar to the production version. On March 3rd, Tritton's chaser was demonstrated to representatives from the British Ministry of Munitions at the Oldbury Proving Grounds near Birmingham, under the official designation of Tritton's Light Machine EMB, with EMB standing for Experimental Machine B. The tests showed both significant strengths and weaknesses for the new design. Chief amongst the problems was the extremely limited field of view for the driver. The fuel tank, meanwhile, was left exposed on the rear of the vehicle, and the lack of exhaust ports for the engine left the crew choking on exhaust gases after mere minutes of operation. Perhaps fittingly, the Whippet prototype was also an absolute bitch to drive, as each engine governed a separate track, requiring the driver to maneuver by manually adjusting the power output via the steering wheel. In spite of all these initial issues, the Ministry of Munitions recognized that Tritton's chaser represented a major step forward in the field of armored warfare. At the time, most schools of thought still clung to the idea of the tank as being a land battleship, with designers constantly pushing for bigger vehicles with more guns and heavier armor. But, thanks to having toured the front lines in person, Tritton had a keen understanding of the modern battlefield, and his design was based on practical wisdom rather than flights of fancy. With the initial approval from the ministry, Tritton shipped the chaser back to his workshop and began a major redesign. The biggest change was to the chassis, the top half of which was entirely removed and replaced by a large polygonal structure with internal mounts for up to 4 machine guns. To address the minor issue of the crew nearly choking to death on engine fumes, 2 exhaust pipes were added to the sides of the vehicle. With the new superstructure, the chaser could be crewed by up to 4 men at once: a driver, a commander, and 2 machine gunners. 360-degree firepower was retained despite the loss of the turret, as the armament was upgraded to 4 Hotchkiss .303 caliber machine guns, each facing a different direction. Further modifications included extra exhaust vents cut into the sides of the engine bay, and moving the fuel tank forwards and encasing it inside a rounded cover. With these changes, Tritton's prototype was swiftly accepted as an obvious choice for mass production. New vehicles based on the design would be known as Whippets, inheriting the title printed on the front of the prototype. The chaser itself remained at the testing grounds of the Mechanical Warfare Supply Department at Dollis Hill in London. Being fully operational, it was used until at least May of 1918 to test various different configurations of trailing wheels and tail skids, for the purposes of improving trench crossing capabilities of the production versions. In total, the chaser was found able to cross trenches up to 10 feet or 3.05 meters wide, though the practical safe limit was closer to 8.5 feet, or 2.59 meters. Sadly, for all of its impact on the battlefields of the Great War, Tritton's prototype was not preserved for long. Details on its ultimate fate are rather hazy, but it did spend at least some time in the Imperial War Museum, only to be removed at some point and finally cut up for scrap metal. Its designer would receive much greater recognition for his efforts, being knighted as Sir William Ashbee Tritton on the 21st of February, 1917. His Whippet tanks would be mass-produced in the hundreds during the Great War, and be used as a major inspiration for the tank doctrine of the British Empire until the advent of the MBT, which rendered the distinction between infantry and cruiser tanks permanently obsolete. This concludes our look at one of the first ever medium tank prototypes. Do you think Tritton could have improved his design? Should he have kept the turret, or was the added firepower worth discarding it? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to check out more articles on British tanks for the Great War era at the Tank Encyclopedia website. Until next time, keep us in your sights.